Lake Tahoe, August 26, 1980. On the surface, it was a paradise, a place where the pristine silence of the mountains met the chaotic noise of the slot machines. At 5 a.m., Harvey's resort hotel was winding down. The high rollers had retreated to their suites. The casino floor was left to the tired staff and the few desperate souls still chasing a lucky break. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and expensive perfume. It was a normal Tuesday morning. But what nobody knew was that a ghost had just entered the building. Moments earlier, a white van had pulled up to the service entrance. Two men, dressed in nondescript gray jumpsuits, unloaded a cargo that strained their muscles. They moved with a strange mix of confidence and terror. They wheeled a large, shroud-covered object into the elevator, pressing the button for the second floor. They didn't head for the vault. They didn't pull out guns. They simply rolled their heavy load into a narrow corridor near the executive offices, blocked the wheels, and walked away. They vanished into the morning mist, leaving behind a metal beast that was already waking up. When the morning shift security guard made his rounds, he almost walked past it. It looked like a piece of IBM computer equipment, covered with a cloth, sitting oddly out of place. But as he drew closer, the illusion broke. He saw the steel casing. He saw the complex array of 28 toggle switches on the side. And he saw the envelope taped to the top. The letter inside wasn't a request. It was a manual. A 3-page document written with the precision of an engineer and the coldness of a killer. It read, "To the management. This device is filled with 1,000 pounds of TNT. Do not move it. Do not tilt it. Do not try to flood it with water. Any deviation will result in an explosion." The FBI arrived within the hour, hoping it was a bluff. But when they peered inside through the vents, their hearts sank. This wasn't a simple pipe bomb. It was a 2-tiered masterpiece of destruction. Experts later called it the most complex, improvised explosive device ever created. It was a puzzle that couldn't be solved, and the timer was already ticking. To understand the machine, you must first dissect the mind of its creator. When the FBI bomb squad stared at that steel monstrosity in the hallway of Harvey's casino, they began to profile their suspect. They imagined a radical political group, a team of military defectors, or perhaps a foreign intelligence agency. The device was too clean, too sophisticated, and too expensive for a common criminal. They were looking for a ghost. They never imagined that the man holding the detonator was a pillar of the community, a man who dined with judges, shook hands with politicians, and lived the quintessential American dream. His name was John Birges. To his neighbors in Fresno, California, he was a success story. But beneath the tailored suits and the charming smile lay a psyche forged in fire. Birges wasn't just a businessman. He was a man who believed, with absolute arrogant certainty, that he could bend the world to his will. Birges was born in Hungary, a country torn apart by the ravages of World War II. He didn't have a childhood. He had a survival course. As a young man, he became a pilot for the Luftwaffe, flying experimental aircraft while the world burned around him. He was captured by the Soviets. For 8 years, he rotted in a Russian gulag, a labor camp designed to break the human spirit. But John Birges did not break. He learned. He learned that the world is cruel, and that only the smartest, most ruthless men survive. When he finally escaped to the United States in 1957, he arrived with nothing but the scars on his back and a burning ambition. He viewed America not just as a home, but as a chessboard, and he was determined to be the king. And for 20 years, he won every game he played. By 1980, John Birges was a millionaire. He built a landscaping empire from scratch, turning dirt into gold. He opened Villa Basque, a high-end restaurant that became the social hub of Fresno. It was a place of luxury, reflecting its owner. Birges lived loud. He drove the latest Mercedes-Benz. He flew his own helicopter. He smoked expensive cigars and demanded perfection from everyone around him. He was a man who needed control, absolute, total control. But success can be boring for a man addicted to adrenaline. The business world was too slow. It was too safe. He needed a new battlefield. and he found it in the neon-lit mountains of Lake Tahoe. Harvey's resort hotel became his second home. But John wasn't a tourist pulling the handle of a slot machine. He was what the casinos call a whale. When Birges walked through the doors, the managers scrambled. They gave him the penthouse suite. They flew in special food. They poured him the finest drinks on the house. They stroked his massive ego, treating him like royalty. Why? Because John Birges gambled like a maniac. He didn't play for fun. He played to dominate. He attacked the blackjack tables with the same intensity he used to fly fighter planes. He believed he had a system. He believed his superior intellect could overcome the laws of probability. For hours, he would sit there, surrounded by stacks of chips worth more than most people's houses, convinced he was invincible. But mathematics has no respect for ego. The winning streaks turned into losing streaks. The penthouse parties turned into lonely, desperate nights. In 1980, the bottom fell out. In a span of just a few months, John Birges lost nearly $750,000. That is $3 million in today's money. Gone. Vaporized. His life outside the casino began to mirror his losses inside. His marriage collapsed in a bitter divorce. His restaurant began to fail. The banks were calling. The IRS was watching. The invincible pilot was finally crashing. Then came the final insult, the moment that turned a gambler into a terrorist. Harvey's resort, realizing that Birges was no longer a source of infinite cash, cut him off. The free suites stopped. The VIP treatment vanished. The staff who once bowed to him now looked through him. To a man like Birges, losing the money was painful, but losing the respect? That was unforgivable. He didn't see his losses as bad luck. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, he decided that Harvey's had stolen from him. They had lured him in, taken his fortune, and discarded him like trash. He returned to his mansion in Fresno, but he wasn't mourning. He was calculating. He told his sons that he wasn't going to let them get away with it. He wanted his money back, all of it. And he was going to use his engineering genius to hold the entire building for ransom. He retreated to his garage. He began to draw blueprints. He didn't want to use a gun. Guns were for thugs. He wanted to build a machine. He spent weeks sourcing dynamite from construction sites under the cover of darkness. He bought timers, relays, and switches from electronics stores, posing as a hobbyist. He obsessed over every circuit, every wire. He was building a puzzle that he believed no one, not the police, not the FBI, not the military, could solve. As he soldered the final connections on the mercury switches, John Birges wasn't just building a bomb. He was building a monument to his own ego. He was about to play the highest stakes game of his life. And this time, he made sure the house could not win. It was 5 a.m. on August 26, 1980. The graveyard shift at Harvey's resort hotel was coming to an end. The cleaners were vacuuming the carpets and the last few gamblers were chasing their losses. Everything was normal. Until a shift manager noticed something strange in the executive office lobby on the second floor. It wasn't a guest. It wasn't a slot machine. It was a large metal object sitting on 4 small caster wheels. It had been draped in a cloth with a crude IBM logo painted on the side, disguised to look like a photocopier being delivered. But when the security guard peeled back the cloth, the illusion vanished. Underneath was gray steel, cold, heavy, industrial, and taped to the side was a simple white envelope with a message that would freeze the blood of anyone who read it. Do not move this bomb. Panic is contagious, but this was a disciplined panic. Within minutes, the call went out. The fire alarms screamed through the hallways. 600 guests were roused from their sleep. Thousands of gamblers were pushed out the doors, leaving piles of chips and half-finished drinks on the tables. The police arrived in waves, sealing off a massive perimeter around Lake Tahoe. By sunrise, the hotel was a ghost town. The lights were still on. The air conditioning was still humming. The music was still playing in the empty elevators. But on the second floor, the gray box sat alone, waiting for its audience. The extortion note inside the envelope wasn't just a demand for money. It was a technical manual. It demanded $3 million in used $100 bills. But the terrifying part was the description of the device itself. The builder wrote with the arrogance of an engineer who knew he had built a masterpiece. He warned the FBI, "This bomb cannot be disarmed, it cannot be moved, it cannot be flooded. Any attempt to tamper with the casing will result in immediate detonation." He claimed the device monitored itself. It was alive, and he was right. The FBI's calmest bomb technicians approached the device. They wore no heavy suits, because at this range, with this amount of explosive, a suit would be useless. They set up their equipment with the precision of surgeons. When they fired up the portable X-ray scanner, they expected to see a standard circuit, maybe a clock, a battery, some blasting caps. What they saw on the monitor shocked them into silence. The interior was a nightmare of density. It was chaotic, yet perfectly organized. The bottom box was packed solid with 28 wooden crates. Inside them lay nearly 1,000 pounds of dynamite, enough force not just to destroy the room, but to shear the entire side of the 11-story building off its foundation. But the dynamite was just the fuel. The brain of the bomb was in the top box. As the experts analyzed the X-rays, they realized they were looking at an unsolvable puzzle. Birges had designed 4 independent trigger systems, creating a web of redundancy that made the bomb nearly impossible to touch. First, there were the anti-opening screws. The metal lid of the box was part of the circuit. If a technician tried to turn a screw to open the lid, the screw would break contact with a metal foil layer underneath, completing the circuit and firing the detonator. Second, the radar and sound sensors. The note claimed the bomb could detect the specific frequencies of tools, drills, or even a loud shout. It was listening. Third, the float switches. The FBI considered flooding the box with water or foam to short-circuit the electronics. But Birges had placed cork floats inside vertical tubes. If water entered, the corks would rise, hit a contact point at the top, and boom. And finally, the most sensitive trigger of all, the mercury tilt switches. Inside the box were glass vials containing a drop of liquid silver mercury. They were balanced perfectly. If the bomb was moved, if it was tilted less than 1 degree, the liquid would slide down the glass, bridging the gap between 2 wires. Instant detonation. The bomb was effectively anchored to the floor by gravity itself. Hours turned into a day. The FBI flew in experts from Washington and the military. They stood in the command center, staring at the blueprints, drinking stale coffee, looking for a loophole. They ran simulations. They built replicas. They argued over strategies. But every scenario ended the same way. The bomb explodes. They tried to pay the ransom. A helicopter was sent to deliver the money, but the drop went wrong. The extortionist went silent. The timer on the bomb, a simple kitchen timer modified to run for days, was ticking down. They were running out of time, and they were running out of options. In the end, there was only one theory left. It was dangerous, unproven, and desperate. The logic was simple. The bomb's brain, the detonators, were in the top box. The dynamite was in the bottom box. If they could separate the brain from the body fast enough, maybe, just maybe, they could prevent the main explosion. They needed to be faster than electricity. They proposed using a shaped charge, a small, focused explosive of their own, to slice through the mechanism and sever the wires before the signal could reach the dynamite. It was a gamble. They were going to shoot the bomb with another bomb. August 27th, 3:43 p.m. The deadline had passed. The extortionist was gone. The bomb was still alive. The FBI agents made their final move. They didn't choose the blue wire or the red wire. They chose C4. The plan was theoretical but sound. Place a small, shaped charge explosive directly on the top box. This charge would fire a focused jet of plasma, moving at 26,000 feet per second, to slice through the detonator wires instantly. The idea was to decapitate the monster before it realized it was dead. The hotel was cleared. The perimeter was pushed back for blocks. The bomb squad retreated to a bunker hundreds of yards away. A single cable ran from the bomb, out the window, across the parking lot, to a small plunger in the captain's hand. Silence fell over Lake Tahoe. No more negotiations, no more math, just physics. Fire in the hole. The shaped charge detonated perfectly. It sliced through the metal casing of the top box. But Birges had outsmarted them one last time. He didn't use copper wires for the triggers. He used a primitive but brilliant web of redundancy. The explosion from the C4 severed the wires, but the shockwave traveled slightly slower than the electrical signal inside the bomb. It was a race measured in milliseconds, and the bomb won. The mercury switches sensed the shock. The circuit closed. 1,000 pounds of dynamite ignited all at once. It wasn't just an explosion, it was an erasure. The blast generated a pressure wave so intense it turned concrete into dust and glass into shrapnel. Harvey's resort hotel didn't just break, it was gutted from the inside out. When the dust settled, the silence returned. But the landscape had changed. Where the executive offices used to be, there was now a gaping hole running through 5 stories of the building. Millions of dollars in damage, a masterpiece of destruction. The FBI had failed to save the casino, but they had succeeded in creating the most spectacular bomb disposal footage in history. In the immediate aftermath, it seemed like John Birges had achieved the perfect crime. The explosion was absolute. It had obliterated the executive offices, shredded the evidence, and turned the most sophisticated improvised explosive device in FBI history into a pile of unrecognizable scrap metal. To the agents sifting through the smoking rubble of Harvey's casino, the trail looked cold. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses to the construction of the device. Birges had built a machine that could defeat the FBI's best technicians, but he had forgotten one critical variable: the human element. The breakthrough didn't come from a forensic lab. It came from a sleepless motel manager down the street. This witness reported seeing a white delivery van tearing away from the hotel just moments before the bomb threat was called in. It wasn't just speeding. It was driving aggressively with its headlights killed, trying to vanish into the darkness. It was a sloppy, amateur mistake. The witness managed to scribble down a partial license plate number. That sequence of numbers led investigators straight to a local rental agency. When the FBI pulled the contract, they didn't find a fake alias or a ghost. The van had been rented by John Birges' own son. The mastermind had left a paper trail right to his own front door. But as investigators dug into the background of John Birges, a tragic profile began to emerge. This wasn't a common street criminal. Birges was a Hungarian immigrant who had survived World War II. He was a former test pilot and a self-made millionaire who had built a successful landscaping empire in Fresno, California. He was a man addicted to winning. But Harvey's casino had become his graveyard. Over the years, Birges had lost his fortune, his business, and his sanity at the blackjack and craps tables of that very hotel. He was over $3 million in debt. The bomb wasn't an act of terrorism. It was a desperate business transaction. He had spent months in his garage, applying his engineering genius to build a device that would force the house to pay him back, with interest. The FBI spent months building their case, tracking his movements and gathering surveillance. They needed it to be airtight. Finally, in August 1981, nearly a year after the explosion, the hammer dropped. Federal agents swarmed Birges' property in a dawn raid. They expected a criminal mastermind, perhaps armed and dangerous. Instead, they found a broken, defeated old man living in the ruin of his own hubris. He was arrested and charged with extortion and interstate bombing. The man who tried to hold a city hostage was now in cuffs. The trial was a spectacle, but the evidence was overwhelming. John Birges was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never see the outside world again. The millionaire who flew planes and built empires died in a concrete prison cell in 1996. He wanted to be remembered as the man who beat the casino. Instead, he died as the man who destroyed it. Today, Harvey's resort hotel has been rebuilt, bigger and brighter than before. The scar has healed. But inside the FBI laboratory in Quantico, the legacy of John Birges lives on. A full-scale replica of his bomb sits behind glass, used to train every new generation of bomb technicians. It is still considered the most complex improvised explosive device ever created on American soil. Birges failed to get his money. He failed to escape. But in a twisted way, he succeeded in his engineering goal. He built the unbeatable bomb, and 40 years later, it is still the only thing in his life that actually worked.